Mr. Chairman, we're live.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Committee will call this meeting to order. Roll call.
Representative Blackburn. Vice Chair Claassen.
Here.
Representative Fortner.
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Western. Representative Ward.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here.
All present.
Okay, the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 3. It's state land leases. We started working the bill last meeting, and since then there's a bunch of work that's been done by the Office of State Lands as well as the stock growers. And we have several amended versions. And I think the best thing for us right now would be to just bring up state lands, and Mr. McGagnon, if you'd come up as well, you had an amended version. We'll go through that. If the committee's okay, we'll go through that, and then we'll have other public testimony. I don't know. Okay, so we need a motion to remove the bill from the table. So moved by who? Worf, as well as Clausen seconded. Close enough. All right, it's off the table, and we're ready for discussion. And as I think I'll just have you go ahead and go through your amendments. We have them before us. And I believe, are these amendments, suggested amendments online? They probably aren't, are they? No. Okay, well, they will be if any of them get moved or the bill gets passed. So go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Jason Crowder, Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me, I have Holly Dyer, Assistant Director for our Trust Land Management Division. We appreciate the opportunity to provide these amendments to you and greatly appreciate the help of the Stock Growers Association in crafting these. Quickly, as we mentioned in the last meeting, we had some concerns about double qualifiers when leasing lands or vacant lands that may be over and above the core requirements to just hold a grazing and agricultural lease. And the first page that you have in front of you, the very colorful page, is an attempt to clean that situation up. It removes a lot of qualifications that are already within 36.5.101. And it places something that the stock growers discussed at the last meeting about being basically in good standing with the board, but further clarifying that to those who have not been found to have significantly violated any laws or regulations related to state lands. So as you can see, we just removed those double qualifiers as we had felt that they were double, inserted the stock growers comment, and then provided the clean version at the bottom of that page to really just give you a clean view of, we are very specifically talking about vacant leases. We are very specifically talking about how you can be qualified to hold a lease, and that there are a couple other qualifiers that are separate from those core qualifiers within 36.5.101. And those are to have actual necessary use of the land and to pay an annual rental of not less than the fair market rental for a period of 10 years. And then to insert the stock growers comment, as I mentioned. Mr. Chairman, that's the first amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions you would have for that.
Okay, committee. So if you look at the bottom of the colorful page, it'll have the clean version. And it'll kind of cut through all of the crossing out and addition of languages. Everybody had a chance to read that? Okay, no questions? Okay, so that, in my mind, if we move the bill and continue on, that'll be one, this page with those amendments will probably be one amendment. If the committee's okay with that, it'll be easier to deal with them as we go along. So, Okay, Mr. Crowder, continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second amendment that we would like to propose relates to the process if the board determines to use preference in leasing vacant lands. And this is a point where the stock growers and the state land office do deviate. I'll speak to our proposed amendment, and I think Mr. McGagnon can speak to his likely. But from our standpoint, as we mentioned in the last meeting, we have rules that were approved by the Board of Land Commissioners so that we could move forward with leasing vacant lands. And in those rules, we lay out a very specific process. And what I've attempted to do here is provide that process as an amendment to you. So really what it does is removes the process that was in the proposed bill and inserts what we currently have in our board approved rules. Meaning that if one or more qualified applicant is eligible for the preference, and there are more than one bid received in a conflict or in a vacant land leasing scenario, then we would go to a second bidding situation. And we'll talk about the second bidding situation here in a minute, but it's basically of any form that the director determines appropriate based on the attributes a specific parcel or situation presents. But it allows, it defines the preference as allowing that preference holding applicant to participate in the second bid. It doesn't allow them the ability to match the high bid. It allows them to give basically their final highest and best bid for that parcel. That's the real difference, I guess, and simply put, it is already in rule and employed in a couple processes we have ongoing.
Okay. So we're on page 3 and 4, or just 3?
Yes, and Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, to fully clarify, our changes have OSLI desired amendments at the top. It has the green. And
Okay.
what we provided for the stock growers on behalf of them, portion that's in red.
Okay. The committee, you've had a chance to look at the clean version of so what it says is House Bill 3 proposed amendment, page 3, line 2 through 22. So that's page we're on. Mr. McGagnon, you can go ahead when you're ready to defend your version of it, which we'll have questions afterwards. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. As Mr. Crowder pointed out, that's the one area where I believe we deviate. And I respect that the language he's provided conforms to their rules, but I would say that we need to conform to the legislative intent of the statute and then amend the rules as necessary. And the preference for adjacent landowner to me means that as you go through the process, if one applicant has a preference and the other one does not, the one with the preference means they always have the opportunity to meet a high bid and be the successful bidder that acquires the lease. As I understand the language proposed by Mr. Crowder, that would be true in the first round, but then in the second round, the preference holder just gets to submit a bid, and if it doesn't happen to be the high bid, they're not given the chance to come back and match that high bid. And to me, that defeats the intent, the legislative intent, and the way we have always understood that the preference applies, that whether you go through one step or 2 or 3 sets of bids, a preference holder versus a non-preference holder always has that final opportunity to match the high bid and acquire the lease. And that's a feature that we seek to protect. And we believe that the language that is currently in the bill does protect that in subsection A. So that's the basis for our disagreement.
Okay, committee questions, discussion. All right, let's move on to the next suggested change in this bill. And that will be page 4. Now, let me look at it real quick. Do we have? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the final amendment that we've offered. And it goes back to the discussion that we had in the previous meeting where we were seeking some discretion and some flexibility when we noticed these parcels of vacant land to adjoining landowners and to determine to drive the highest bid possible out of these parcels. It's simply changing the direction of notice from by mail to directly to each adjoining landowner, private landowner, and we anticipate that could be by mail, by email, by phone call, or by knocking on the door. And then we further define how we would identify those parties as those that are currently recorded with the county assessor's office, so that we have a very clear set of data that we're pulling from, and we're not hopefully missing anybody at that point. Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Questions, committee? Okay. Stock growers is fine with that portion of it then?
Mr. Chairman, we added the word directly, and I believe Mr. Crowder incorporated that in his comments. So we're on the same page.
Okay. I just found another piece of paper here and it's page 2. So we're going to have to back up just a little bit because we went through the lands office. Hang on.
Chairman Eklund,
Yes,
was the last one that you just saw, say page 2, is Mr. McGagna's name written on the top?
it
left-hand?
is.
Okay.
It
so
is. And I did not give him an opportunity to talk about what changes there would be between the land office and yours.
Mr. Chairman, on which
So we,
portion is that?
it would be page 2, lines 1 through 19.
Okay, Mr.
You
Chairman,
have
thank
that.
you.
Okay.
I believe we're both have the exact same language on that. The only difference that I was fine with the language presented by the State Land Office. I moved the language I gave you the other day about significant violations, moved it up to that section because as it's currently would be, it would only apply to people with a preference, and the requirements to not have had a significant violation should apply equally to all applicants, not just those who happen to have a preference. So I moved that language, and as Mr. Crowder has incorporated it up to line 2. I might mention one other item there that we are in agreement on, but we both were comfortable with deleting the language, the requirement that you be a citizen of the state of Wyoming or authorized to do business in Wyoming. And my reasoning on that is I know we have landowners who cross the border. You may have a ranch in Montana with a ranch headquarters, but they have significant ranching in Wyoming, have state leases there. They may be residents in Montana. If they have a legal structure, corporation or otherwise, it may be incorporated in Montana, not in Wyoming. And I was concerned that if that was kept in there as an absolute requirement, we could in effect, by enforcing it, negatively impact some ranching operations that are important to our state.
Yes. Okay. Committee, any questions? Yeah. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McGagna, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, in my country, in Sheridan County, all the folks out in Bernie and Otter and the Tongue River Breaks also have a lot of land deeded and leased land in Wyoming. So from that standpoint, I think it totally makes sense. But, what if it's someone who, owns land in Wyoming or Montana or wherever that may be, but doesn't actually, let's say their residence is wherever, Florida, Texas, in those situations. Is there a way to thread the needle where we can really give preference to these people who are here year round, who are really investing their blood, sweat, and tears, and kind of thread that needle and kind of differentiate between those two types of groups, or would that be too difficult?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Western, I gave some thought to that before I was willing to drop that language to just make it a preference rather than a requirement. The thing that discouraged me is now you have two preferences. You have a preference for joining land and you have a preference for living in the state of Wyoming. And it's been difficult enough to sort out how you handle this one preference. And when I thought of the challenge of having two preferences and competing against each other, and if I have one and you have the other, do we prioritize one of them? It just seemed that While there's some opportunity for what you say, I think that's partially addressed by the fact that this would require that they have a necessary use for the land. So they are running a ranching operation that's using the land. They're not just holding it because they want to hold state trust land. So it's kind of a compromise in my mind, at least.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought Tuesday we discussed the fencing issue, and I don't see amendment for that in here. Or was that taken care of Tuesday? Who would to decide on who's going to pay for the fencing on the school section that's in the middle of somebody else or beside somebody else?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Crowder.
Chairman. Representative Fortner, I appreciated the conversation on Tuesday, but I believe we determined that was a completely separate issue from vacant land leasing and not a part of this bill, so we didn't offer amendments for that.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. So there's case law that usually sets up how the fencing will be done, and I think state lands will abide by that law. So, all right. So on the, we're not gonna quite be ready to work the bill. Are you done sharing? There was a minor difference in the First Amendment that we would have, and then a bigger one in the middle of this bill that we'll discuss as a committee. And then you were in pretty much full agreement on the tail end of it. So on page 4. So I think we'll open things up to public comment right now. And I stand by in case we have any more questions from you. Thank you. Marguerite Herman, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Marguerite Herman, and at this moment, I'm wearing the hat for a group called Advocates for School Trust Land. So I'm just going to zero in on the trust issue involved here as I see it. And just sort of to lift the whole discussion up to 10,000 feet, just to, I ask all you all to be very mindful that the trust lands exist, were created at statehood for the purpose of supporting public education. And so that put you in the job of trustees to take care of the land, to make sure it's producing revenue to the best possible ability for the school children of the state. And now, and I guess it was about maybe 20 years ago, the Wyoming Supreme Court said, yes, you can, well, and backing up, one more proviso is that we all know that competition produces the highest prices, highest income, always has. That's why our state constitution says that these lands have to be disposed of. If you dispose of them at a public auction, because recognizing that's what produces the most competition, the highest bids. The Wyoming Supreme Court has said that we can mitigate that for current lessees, that we can give them a preferential right that admittedly depresses competition and decreases the bids because there's a long-term good that comes out of that. A ranch has at least a section, school section for generations. It's vital to their operation. They said, that's fine, you can do that. But I think this is vacant lands, and I think this is a different issue, and that I would support, I guess getting to the point, I would support the Office of State Lands and Investments position, the kind of preference that others are supporting, including the stock growers, create such a strong preference that, again, it goes into that area of depressing the competition for this, because it's really a preference. Well, the one that the OSLI is their practice is that you always guaranteed a seat at the table. You are guaranteed to be, if you're not the high bidder on the first round, you get to do the second round. So that's the preference, that you always have a seat at the table able to compete. And that to me is the preference that has been used for years. It works. It is vacant land. So I think it's a much different kind of a standard than the renewing a lease, which again, the courts have told us that's okay. You can forego income because there's a greater good. And I think here I would just urge you to use the rules, the practice, and put in state law what the Board of Land Commissioners and OSLI have been using. I think it does give a preference to adjacent landowners. It doesn't do it to the point of really compromising the revenue that can be made from these sections. So I would urge you to use the OSLI's version of the preference. There are pieces on this in this bill that are really good, especially distinguishing between preference and preferential right, which gets used interchangeably and it's very confusing. So that's basically, the alternative. I guess the real purist would say, do we really need this preference at all? But I know that's, it's important to the legislature as trustees of the land to preserve that. And I guess what I'm saying is don't make it even more preferential than it is now. I think it serves its purpose.
Committee, any questions? Okay, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So we talked at the last meeting about optimizing the bid process, not necessarily getting the highest dollar amount as being the best bid. Oftentimes the land only fits into one area. It does. We have a case, I believe, in the state where there's a state land has been given to the highest bidder, and he's isolated out in the middle of a ranch and has no access to this state land. It confuses what he can do. Last I heard, he was maybe needed a helicopter to get into it. So that's part of the reason we set this up. The other part is we have 70 to 100 vacant land parcels that we need to settle. And if we don't get this law fixed and straightened out, we'll have a loss of income. As we speak, we're losing income on state lands that will help our schools. So there will be some compromising on the bill, I'm sure. We want it to conform as much as we can to what we actually do with the other state lands. And oftentimes the vacant land, the only way you can deal with it is using preference and adjoining landowners to be able to get optimum use out of that parcel.
So,
yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, so, and that language about optimizing and maximizing and the distinction between the two, I think arose in that Riedel versus Anderson case for the Wyoming Supreme Court. And I see a real sort of organic difference between preserving a ranch and existing leases and the vacant lease. And I think that the preference to the adjacent landowner is something that the legislature and OSLI and the Board of Land Commissioners all recognize. And I think that to the extent that this bill or the version from OSLI and the rules they do now, I think achieves that. I think there's only so much, if you're counting on the market to create the competition that we all know gets the best price, I think to some extent you can't control all the variables. And this is a case where that you've given the adjacent landowner a seat at the table at every single round, which is what we've been doing and I think works. And as far as the backlog, that's kind of that I think Mr. Crowder explained on Tuesday, that was a function of lack of staff. That's unusual. I think in most years it's much less than that. Maybe, well, I'm not sure, a dozen or two max. So this is really an unusual situation, and there is a backlog, and that is an issue. And I think that the sooner, and I agree, the sooner we can get this settled, the better. But I guess what I'm saying is the preference that has been in practice as for years and maybe needs codifying. I think I think does give the preference, but I think it doesn't do it to the point where it, puts a thumb on the scale, so to speak, or stacks the deck, which again, existing renewal, we've all agreed, yes, we'll forego income on that because there's a greater good. But I don't see that applying in this for vacant leases. And so there's a preference, but it's not a guarantee. That's where I see the difference.
Okay. We will have, more than likely have a discussion about a live auction since it was in the original bill and then it's eliminated by both stock growers as well as the land office. I'm guessing that we will. What's your opinion on that as a final way of trying to optimize the
And
lease?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't understand.
A live auction
Well,
as a final determiner.
well, Mr. Chairman, I guess if that's agreed on as maybe one way, I don't think I'd want to make it mandatory. But maybe on occasion, if the Board of Land Commissioner says that's what we want to do, then that could be on the table. But I think sealed bids, which is different from simply matching a bid, which again, we do for renewed leasing. And we all agree, once again, that you do forego income that way, but there is this greater good achieved. But I think sealed bids would achieve the level of competition we want to preserve. Again,
Okay.
once again, to create something close to the market, if not the market.
Okay, then we maybe won't bring up the possibility of a live auction. Sounds like everybody's in agreement. We don't need that. We've got a process that'll work fine. Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Public comment is closed. We don't have anybody online, do we, Carol? Okay. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
And moved
guess.
by Representative Larson, seconded by Worf. So we have some changes in front of us, and I'd like to do them one amendment at a time so we're able to work through those. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think they're on page 2, line 1 through 18. I think they're in agreement with what was proposed by OSLI, the colorful sheet. And I
Okay.
would make that a motion to use that as the amendment.
It's been moved and seconded on the amendment number 1, and you have those amendments in front of you too, Carol. Let me just read them so that the public has a better idea of what we're doing. So the clean version, I'm trying to see if they are exactly the same, but I think they are. No applicant shall be, where we are on page 2, lines 1 through 18. No applicant shall be qualified to lease vacant lands unless that applicant is qualified under the provisions of WS 36-510-101, has actual and necessary use of the land, offers to pay an annual rental at not less than the fair market value as determined by the economic analysis pursuant to Wyoming Statute 36-5-101B for the same or similar use of the land for a period of 10 years and who have not been found to have significantly violated any laws or regulations related to state lands. Also in leasing vacant lands, and that goes into the next page. No, it stays on the same page. Also in leasing vacant lands, Romanet 1, subject to paragraph Romanet 2 of this subsection, preference shall be given to applicants who are owners, lessees, and lawful occupants of adjoining lands. Okay, committee, are we clear on that? All those in favor Wait a second. You're good back there? Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a technical correction, because that section refers to individual applicants. And in the provision that we added at the end, it says who have not been found. I believe appropriately, it should say who has not been found rather than have. So
Okay.
that the entire paragraph is in the singular.
Okay. Do you have that, Carol? Switch have to has.
Has rather than have.
And while we're here, I don't know if anybody has an answer for it, but it's got resident citizens of Wyoming. And I'm not real sure, but I think that language isn't consistent with what law is. We're citizens of the United States, residents of the states within the US. So, but I think am I correct on that? We're not really citizens of the state of Wyoming, but we're residents.
We've eliminated that language in
Okay.
our joint proposal.
All right.
So it's not in there
Well,
anymore.
it was in statute, so I wanted to be sure that I understood what we are. I thought I did. Okay, thank you, Mr. McGagnon. Committee, are you ready to vote on this amendment? Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in agreement with the has and the have that they suggested.
Okay, yes. All right. And second's okay with it. All right, we are in agreement that that's some good word crafting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that amendment passes. Amendment number 2, and I've got papers scattered all over the place here, but I believe goes to page 3. So we have two versions that are a little bit different from one another. And Representative Larson, you have an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I
Discussion?
would like to go with the stock growers version,
Okay,
and I would make that motion to use that as the amendment.
okay. Been moved by Larson, seconded by Worf. Discussion. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How far are we planning on carrying this preferential of right of the adjoining landowners? If they go through multiple iterations and they always have the right to match the highest bid, as we heard in testimony, it's going to depress the amount of revenue we're getting for our schools, for our school children as intended for these state lands. And if I was in that situation, I would sit back because I know in the very end, I'm going to get it no matter what. So with what the Office of State Lands has proposed, they have a preference the first go around, but then if at that point, it's open to others to have at least a shot at getting that parcel of land at market value. So I think the preference is being overly emphasized with what's being proposed by the stock growers. And I'm going to vote against that.
Okay. Yeah, Representative Clausen.
Here. Mr. Chairman, just to speak to that. So a lot of times the forage value is far less than the cost that it would take to, not a lot of times, almost every time to refence or change the configurations on a single school section. So the preference actually long-term makes a lot of sense economically. It's not just apples to apples because of the switches and other arrangements that have to be done when you change leases in certain parcels.
Representative Heiner.
Follow up to that. I'm sure if someone is bidding on a parcel of land, they do an economic analysis. They know what it's going to cost to get in there and operate that. They're not just going in blind. So they will know what it'd be cost, what the cost would be. And this great nation is based on capitalism competition. And this brings a little bit of competition into our state lands and maximizes the funds going into our school children to help education. And that's the intent in the Constitution for these state lands. Thank you, Mr.
And I don't see anyone else, so I'm gonna defend that this amendment does drive the competition. Anybody who's competing against each other for the bid, that thing will be driven up to what you just spoke of, what the economic benefits can be to either of the people bidding on it. You know, I'm not sure, you know, I'm not just real sure that I think it optimizes the land use is probably what it does more than anything else. But I think it also drives up and creates a competition. There aren't many times when you get into a bidding process on the state lands because our state land board has decided that this is the best way to care for trust lands. There have been other states that open up the bidding every 10 years. And they usually just end up selling the land. It's such a pain in the neck to try to manage it. So other states, one to the east of us, I know doesn't have a whole lot of trust lands left to draw money from for their schools. And I don't want to see Wyoming do that. That's part of why I'll be in favor of this amendment. To have a system that we know has worked pretty well through the years, and hopefully not when we do get into a bidding process, we optimize the use of the land, the bid of the land too. So that's kind of my opinion of the thing. Any other discussion on it? Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this discussion brings into question what is the proper use of this state land? And I think that's the main concern here is if somebody doesn't have land adjacent to it, how are they going to use it? And if they do not have, if they use it, they're going to be trespassing on some other people's land. And so I think you have to do as the stock growers have indicated here, we have to use this amendment to clarify that. So thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, all those, go ahead, Representative Wharf. I didn't see you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see the concern, but I actually think that we address that. The way I read this, preference is given, you know, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do is make it a fair process. If you got two people making a competitive bid, they do, and in the amendment we move forward, it's actually on the page that we have, it's labeled as subsection C. It says when two or more applicants are eligible for the preference and one or more applicant are not eligible for the preference, those applicants who are eligible for the preference may elect to match the highest bid. If two or more applicants who are eligible for the preference elect to meet the highest bid, the lease shall be awarded pursuant to subparagraph B of this, which you go back to B and it just says that they are told it goes back for a final time. The director says, give me a final bid. So to me, that is the opportunity to keep bidding that up. It comes down to if the way I read it, if you are two adjoining landowners that are bidding for that same parcel, it does go back to where you do get one final bid. And that is, if you got two guys that both have preference, they both will know what the bid has been, what the highest bid was. They can either match it or they can increase it, or they can say, I don't want it. So I think it's still there. I'm not worried about it. I think the fairness is there. And I think it does allow that competition. It is weighted for preference, which, I mean, I think it only makes sense. A lot of these guys have done developments. They've done water development. They've done fencing. They've done all these things. So they've got a vested interest in it. And I do think that this is designed to ensure that we keep productivity in that mix, because if you get it to where somebody can come in and just pay more money than you can justify as a ranching operation, it kind of circumvents what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep this in productivity and keep it going. And I do believe that's the concern, is that other people could come in if we open it up too much and start taking these state lands out of production and maybe doing other things with it. So I'm a yes vote, and I respect my colleague that has concern, but I don't think they're warranted. Thank you.
Okay. Now are we ready to vote? Question being called for. All those in favor of amendment number 2, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. All right, that amendment passes. Now we have a third one. And this one got paper scattered all over. I think we're in agreement with both stock growers and the land board. Would be on page 4, line 1 through 5. Do I have a motion on that, on the one we have before us, and then we'll go into discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion that we accept the amendment that was provided.
All right,
And I think it's in the colored one.
been moved by Larson, seconded by Wharf, and I will go ahead and read that, the clean version. And we're on page 4, lines 1 through 5. It's Romanet 3. Before accepting applications to lease vacant land, the director shall provide notice on the website of the office directly to each adjoining private landowner as recorded within the county assessor's office and by any other means as prescribed by rule. So we have discussion on this amendment. All right, we're ready to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So any further discussion on the bill? Question's been called for. Let's go ahead and have a roll call. Carol.
Representative Blackburn. Vice Chair Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Fortner. Representative Heiner.
No.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Representative Wharf.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Would be 8 ayes, 1 no, do pass with amendments.
Thank you. The next bill for consideration is House Bill 2. And we have our distinguished colleague from the beautiful Star Valley region. He's also chairman of Select Water, and he will, with the help of the state engineer's office, explain the bill for us. So whenever you're ready, give us your name, rank, and everything. So
Thank you,
Carol has it
Mr.
ready.
Chairman. My name is Representative Evan Simpson. I'm here representing the Select Water Committee. It's a pleasure to be in front of my favorite standing committee. You're fortunate to serve where you are. You've got such a variety of topics and fun things to entertain. Appreciate representative from the state engineer's office here. I must disclose, there is one person in the room who is far more expert than I am that should be presenting this bill, and that is Representative Larson. So at the very end, if there's any really hard questions, these two gentlemen will be able to answer those. So we'll carry on with that. Now, this is a rather large bill, but I think we can dispense of it fairly quickly because I know that you've already read through it once. And so I'm going to focus on the highlights of what this bill is all about. So members of the committee, when a developer takes a piece of property, wants to subdivide it, he subdivides, it's called a subdivision in the county. It's called an addition if it's inside of a municipality. There's various requirements depending on whether it's inside of a municipality or a county. But the bottom line is he has decisions to make with the water rights on that piece of property. So it's an ag property. And when he's dividing it, he can do one of 4 or 5 options. And the challenge is, in the past, the developers quite often will choose one but never follow through with it. So what's happening is we're having some very valuable water rights that are just left in limbo. And once the subdivision is completed and all the lot owners are purchasing the lots and own the lots, it's really almost impossible to go back in retrospect and try to clean up the water rights. So this bill does that once and for all. It requires the developers to follow all the way through with, they have the option of what to do with the water rights, but they have to finish and get those appropriated appropriately through the State Board of Control or the State Engineer's Office. So let's dig into it. I'd like to direct your attention to page 2. So in the statutes, chapter 15 pertains to cities and towns. So that's what we're talking about now, cities and towns. They're the weakest of the requirements. So we're actually writing new subsections for them. So you'll see on line 6, with respect to any water rights pertinent to lands to be subdivided or in accordance with this section and prior to certification and approval of the map or plat, the governing body shall require the owner of the property, the subdivider, to submit to the governing body the following. Okay, so on line 12, the intended disposition of water rights. So the first option he has is under letter A, and that is to voluntarily, on line 18, voluntarily abandon the water rights. That's one of his options, completely just give them all up. So in that case, he has to, according to this paragraph, he has to have a written document from the state engineer or the Board of Control saying that, yep, we're following through and those water rights are going to be abandoned. On page 3, line 1, then here's another option for the developer. He can change on line 3 to change the use or place of use to provide for beneficial use of the water rights outside the subdivision, which may include a transfer to the city or the town. That's always the best option because subdivisions typically in cities and towns, they're going to get a service connection tap from the city and they'll start drinking city water, and they probably will not have irrigation pipes to water the lawns with. They usually do that through the drinking water system. So this option covers that. So if they transfer the rights to the city or town, then they can then transfer them to their intervening head gate and utilize the water rights within the cities or towns' water rights. Okay, on item C, line 9, plan accompanied, and again, I want to emphasize that first sentence. You'll see it over and over again. The plan accompanied by written documentation from the state engineer that he has approved the plan. Okay, that's what we're after here, is an approved plan. Whatever options we take, we have an approved plan before the subdivision is finally approved by the city or county. So this one says on line 12, the plan shall specify the distribution of the water to the lots. So some developers actually run a secondary irrigation system to their lots so that those lots can literally use irrigation water to irrigate with. That's a great option. We love that. Now we're not using drinking water for irrigating lawns and gardens in large lots, but we actually have ditch water that we're using. So that's an option. There it is in C. Now you'll see on line 19, the word or, the last word or. So again, the developer has all these options. Here's the fourth option. Written documentation from the State Board of Control that has accepted an authorization to detach the water rights appurtenant to lands. So in other words, if a owner has a parcel of land right next door that is not irrigated, does not have water rights, he can detach the water rights from the parcel he's developing and drop it over onto the next door lot that he owns that he's going to detach. And there's many other scenarios there, but as an option is to transfer those water rights to a different parcel. Okay, those are the 4 options, but in all those options, we've said no longer do you just have to say you're going to, you literally have to follow through and you have to do it. And we have written documentation from the state engineer's office that it's a done deal. Now, the drawback you're going to hear from this is it's going to slow the subdivision process down. If the developer isn't on top of that, doing that water rights work in advance, and he procrastinates and gets into the subdivision process, it takes a while for the state engineer's office and the Board of Control to work through these things. There's always red lines coming back to the engineers and surveyors to modify things. And so it's going to slow the process down. You're going to hear that as the biggest complaint of the bill.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, in this section D, are there times when they detach these water rights and let them kind of sit there in limbo trying to find a home for them? And is there a limit of time for that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we refer to that as the ADWR, the Authorization for Detachment of Water Rights. And so that allows for these lands to be detached into a mythical bank for a period of up to 5 years. So it allows the development to go forward while we try to find a home for these rights. If there is no change in place of use, change in use, if the water is not moved or otherwise dealt with, it will be abandoned after 5 years.
Okay. Yeah. Representative Heiner, and I'll get to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I've been involved in some water rights down to one of the states to the southwest of us, whereby some ranchers were able to detach the water rights and sell those water rights to large cities. And so some of the land becomes non-irrigated because the value of the water is more than what they care to invest into irrigating their own land. And as the Colorado River system becomes more drought stricken, I fear that could be something that may happen as some of these larger cities, down the Colorado River or other areas, they may come into Wyoming and say, here, we will buy your water rights if we can detach it and force us to flow our water out of state. Is this a possibility that could happen?
Mr. Chairman, that's a different subject than what we're on right now, but be aware, as the Colorado River continues to be in this drought situation, there could come a time when even the city of Cheyenne or a city down south of us could be restricted on their water to the point that they can't serve water to their residents. And they would be forced to purchase water from an agricultural user upstream somewhere. It's definitely part of the system, part of the options. But the key there is that they can't go up and take the water from the rancher and the farmer. They have to offer that person enough money that makes it worth it for him to dry his land up. But as the world changes and as populations move into the cities, this is certainly something that's going to be on the table.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Heiner.
So as someone comes in and subdivides the land, and rather than keeping that water on the land to the various subdivisions or giving it to the local town or something, would it be possible for this subdivider or this company that's subdividing lands to see a revenue source, additional revenue source, to buy up agricultural land and subdivide it, and then not only sell the land, but separate the water and send that out of state?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner. The process is pretty well defined in Wyoming. And first of all, the nature of water rights in Wyoming, they are pertinent to that land.
And so the process for an adjudicated water right would be to petition the Board of Control under the change in use or change in place of use statute. So if you're taking irrigated lands, you could change the beneficial use through that petition, through a docket to the state engineer, or excuse me, the Board of Control. Shipping it out of state, of course, there's an export statute. You're involving water compacts, and it's probably not that realistic.
We've got our acting state engineer here. Come on up and state your name. And
Mr. Chairman, if I may just add to
Okay.
the question. So if water right is abandoned, it goes back to the system. And any new permit on that, somebody would have to come in and file a new permit with the state engineer. And it would have to go through our process to do that. So your question about selling the water, I don't believe that if it's abandoned voluntarily or involuntarily, they can't just sell that to a downstream entity. You'd have to go through a permitting process once it's abandoned.
yes, and this bill pertains to subdividing land. That would be a different subject. It is being done. The irrigators in Wyoming are selling irrigation water across state lines, being paid for it. So there's a process that it's being done with, and right or wrong, go ahead. You have something to add?
No,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, all right. Representative Wharf.
Yeah, I hate to show my ignorance, but can you maybe tell me a little bit about who's on the State Board of Control, how that's put together? Just because I'm not familiar with that, but could you kind of tell us a little bit about how that is and who's on that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I would be happy to address that. The state engineer and the Wyoming Board of Control were created via Constitution. The Board of Control members are made up of the 4 water division superintendents throughout the state, as well as the state engineer serves as the president of the Board of Control. The Board of Control meets quarterly, and they adjudicate and hear petitions to modify water rights. And so they typically deal with adjudicated water rights, whereas the state engineer is usually permitting or addressing unadjudicated rights.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
We have had more discussion. Representative Clarkson.
Just a quick
Sorry,
question
I
on the bill.
skipped over you.
No, that's fine. Your method where you move, or in the bill, the method where you move from the subdivision to another piece of land, I assume it has to go through the rules and have a method of conveyance and or is that, it's probably covered under some other rule? Yes, no, or I'm in the weeds.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, it is well defined by the change in place of use or change in use statute 41-3-104, which does have specific requirements in order to do that change. For one, and the prohibitive factor many times is that historic consumptive use that the board must evaluate. You can't move a water right that is defunct. So it would be perceived as an injury to others to move that inactive right, according to statute.
Okay, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm hopefully suggest that we continue, and I shouldn't have opened up the can of worms, but I don't have
Yeah.
a question.
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Committee will try to stick with the bill as much as we can. It's on waters and subdivided land. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm on page 4, Roman numeral 2. So the concept we just presented is one concept. Here's a second concept that's included in the bill. So if the subdivision is located within lands where a ditch or an irrigation structure is located, so let's just say a ditch runs through. They're required under this Roman numeral 2, 60 days prior to submitting of the plat, they have to submit that to the irrigation company or the owners of the ditch. and give them the opportunity to reply and talk about what's recorded on the plat. Obviously, they'll be looking at easements, how they're going to manage the ditch with the subdivision lane on top of it. So they will respond in writing to the city or town for them to be able to consider the ramifications. Roman numeral 3, evidence that the owner will specifically state on all offers and solicitations for future lot owners relative to the subdivision, the owner's intent to comply with this paragraph, and the owner does not warrant to the purchaser that the purchaser shall have any rights of natural flow. So what the way I envision this happening on every subdivision plat, there's called plat warnings. So they'll just put a paragraph on there that says, by the way, even though that ditch runs through your property, you don't have any water rights. Because sometimes people see ditches and canals and they're going, wow, it's in my lot 23. I own that. I can start putting a pump in it, sucking it out and start using the water. And so this numeral 3 simply says there's a plat warning that says you do not necessarily have any water rights. Page 5, Roman numeral 4. Again, if the subdivision is located within the boundaries of an irrigation district, then the irrigation district will be notified, and they have the option of including to the city and town issues that they may have that might conflict. For example, there might be a structure on lot 23 that they have to gain access to every week to clean off the screen or something like that. And they need to be able to have the opportunity to present that to the city and town and say, there's a problem here. You can't just build subdivision fences around this area because we have to have access to it. So it's just a good communication effort. Roman numeral 5 on page 5. If the subdivision will create a significant additional burden or risk of liability to the public or the entity, the irrigation company, then the owner shall provide an adequate and responsible plan to reduce or eliminate the additional burden or risk of liability. So if there's a real challenge on this irrigation ditch, this paragraph requires the owner to put forth a plan to try to mitigate that. He just can't ignore it. Okay, I'm on page 6 now. Here's the deal. Chapter 18 of the statutes is all about counties, not cities. So we have to reiterate everything that we just went through. So I'll let you glance down through the next several pages. But they're just reiterating the exact same thing, only we're putting it in a different statute that pertains to counties. So I'm going to go now to page 11. Again, we're in chapter 18, which is another section of the statutes that talks about large acreage subdivisions. We have to do the same thing that we've done previously in all of those statutes. So you can glance down through those. It says the exact same thing we've talked about, et cetera, et cetera. And you're amazed that I'm now back down to the final 2 pages of the bill. You have any questions about why I skipped over that? It's the same concept, just talking in different sections of the statutes. Okay, page 14. Again, we're just cleaning up. It's just conforming language to make sure that everyone understands what's going on. And then page 15 and 16 closes it down by giving you an effective date. Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully that helps you understand how important this bill is.
Committee Representative Clausen.
Just, Mr. Chairman, just one question. In the version where when a ditch stays in the subdivision, is there a provision in law already to make sure there's a right of way? I assume there is the ditch right. or is that something that needs to be covered at another date on this fulfillment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I am unaware of any provision or statute that addresses that. Many of our conveyance systems work under prescriptive easements, that they've been using this for a period of years and they have some legal right to do so. But it seems, at least in my purview, somewhat uncommon where there is an actual easement on many of these ditches. Now, the bigger irrigation districts may have more formality, but it is not set in stone.
Mr. Chairman, the beauty about the subdivision process is that easements are set aside. So the boundaries around the outside of the lots are usually established for power and telephone lines. And if there's an irrigation ditch through, it would be a delinquent effort by the engineer or surveyor not to literally identify that right away going through and identify the widths and lengths so that everybody knows on the plat.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, and I think that's a real reason for this. Out in the county, they already deal with it in the irrigation districts, but also in the city, we definitely want to make sure that if there's a underground drain, which isn't tied to water essentially, but we want to make sure that the irrigation districts have a chance to say, hey, we've got a drain right here. You can't dig your basement here because you're going to run into some problems. So they can identify those issues and place them.
Okay,
Easements.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Simpson, is there anything here that this is proactive or kind of looks back on current situations where water rights have been abandoned, or is this only going forward from the effective date?
Mr. Chairman, there is no such a thing as going back in history. Unfortunately, those subdivisions that are already established that have just allowed the water rights to just be floating in midair. There's nothing we really can do about that. This is going forward, future plats.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. So really, if for municipalities in Wyoming that are facing situations where there's a lot of abandoned or unclear or unadjudicated water rights, it's just kind of tough luck. They really have no remedies.
No, there is remedies. They can work with the current landowners and file petitions with the State Board of Control. They can get the conveyance process. I've worked with some municipalities and it's a big job, especially where the subdivision is large. And all of a sudden you're dealing with 15, 20, 30, 40 landowners and you have to have their approval because it requires a change of use from ag to municipal and then requires a change of point of diversion to the head gate of the city. And so you have to have every lot owner's approval to do that. So it makes it tougher.
Okay. Yes, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to follow up on the questions that our good representative has just been asking. I guess I would like to ask the Board of Control, is there times when there is an area in a city that has already been subdivided and maybe they're going to do another subdivision inside that where they have water rights that are hanging there and nothing has been done with them? So I would like to ask the Board of Control and the State Engineer Office if they have situations like that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, as we see with the bill in front of us, there's the attempt to create a new statute affecting these water rights where there is none currently within municipalities and towns. In my experience, and when I gained my position, I realized this problem was occurring in Sheridan. Through forging a partnership, while not required, the city of Sheridan has allowed my staff and I to comment on new developments coming up. And so while we don't have any real teeth at the time, we comment on these and I don't want it to be burdensome where someone is coming in front of that planning commission to do a simple redevelopment or lot split. And now they have to seek consent from hundreds of people that are under a blanket territorial water right that was never dealt with previously. And so that is a slight concern I do have. We want this to be perfect. We want it to work. And truly, I think the intent here is to stop the problem from occurring going forward and not making it burdensome where the problem exists already.
One of the, oh, go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Simpson, and forgive my ignorance, but I thought when you bought land, that water right follows it through the title process. I mean, obviously, if there's some kind of encumbrance or defect, that's one thing, but I guess I just thought that this would have been solved or been largely dealt with because those rights follow that land. If I sell half this, you get the half the water rights that came with this land when I bought it, kind of thing.
I'm going to start and let you finish. If you buy a large piece of land, that's always the case, comes with the land that's attached to the water right. However, if you're a lot owner and the ditch or pipeline is hundreds of yards away and you buy the land, the lot, you have no means of conveyance. So all of a sudden you're sitting there, there could be water in the ditch or pipe, but you have no access to it. So the water right itself becomes just hanging out there because no one can use the water. Did I say that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, many of our towns and cities are underlain by some of the oldest water rights in Wyoming, and they have a very broad description of that water right. And it may have been the John D. Laux appropriation for several hundred acres. Now through development over time, now we have many dozens, hundreds, even thousands of owners of these water rights. To do any change to that water right, you must seek consent from everyone in that blanket description. Water rights, to further address your question, water rights are pertinent to the land. And so that name on that permit and the name on the certificate isn't as impactful as the ownership of that property. When you bought that property, you have the right to use that water. Even if it's defunct or not, it's still on that land.
Chairman, first,
Go ahead.
excellent example using shared reference. So technically that abandoned though, let's say if I am a lot owner and I did so choose to pony up the money for the means of conveyance to actually use that water, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, I have a petition on the docket right now in Division 2 where someone on the western end of Sheridan is attempting to change the point of diversion of a territorial 1882 water right to a pump in Big Goose Creek. At last count, they had gathered 682 deeds and must seek consent from all of those people. Because as those lands were annexed and subdivided, this was not a process.
Yeah. So if we're on page 3C, helps to address some of what you're talking about as far as going forward. I do know what Representative Western is talking about has created problems, and in part because we don't have this legislation in place. We have a case in Lander, and some of us might remember the legislation. I don't think it made it from the Senate to the House. But when they finished up, there was just no way to statutorily clean up the water rights that were being conveyed throughout the city of Lander. So I don't think it's cleaned up yet. I know of one city that has water running through it, and people water their yards with it. They've maintained a water right and beneficial use for their yards and whatnot. And it works fine as far as I know. This is to hopefully get things in order before we have a development and problems arise with the water rights. Go ahead, Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question, and it's just things I've heard. I know that there was a subdivision here in this county where once it was developed, the runoff that resulted from that created problems elsewhere. And I know on page 5, it's identified, starts on 16, talks about the significant addition, burden, or risk. I guess the question I have is what happens in the event that a plan is approved, development goes in, and something that was not seen as a potential problem surfaces, and that liability was not really disclosed? Who's assuming that liability? Because the plan was approved by the board. It seems like to me, I know nobody's got a crystal ball, and in the event that there is something that happens that was not forecast or not clearly understood, where does that liability fall if the developer had an approved plan and a situation arose where there was runoff water that created damage somewhere else? Who's then liable for that? I guess?
Representative Wharf, so we're talking about irrigation water and not flood water or runoff water that is, and it would be an entirely different issue, and the counties usually have to deal with that. I know the one
and
you
I just
talked
know it
about.
was a mess from what I heard.
Correct, but
and
it
I just-
wasn't irrigation water, it was
Okay,
runoff water.
So this is just dealing with irrigation water going
Yes.
through a subdivision. Okay,
Yes,
because the next question I was going to ask is how does that affect somebody that's got a barrel out there collecting rainwater? Because, yeah, so that helps me understand. So we're just talking about if I've got an irrigation system crossing that property, I can't shut that down and say, sorry. That helps me understand a lot better. Thank you. Because I wanted to make sure that we were covering all that risk, but that.
All right,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any more questions? I think we're ready for public comment. Thank you, all of you, for coming up and giving us this information. I do not, we do have public comment. Come on up, Keith. And more come.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kenny on behalf of Wyoming Crop Improvement Association, and we fully support this bill. The one question that I would have regarding some of the language that is in here, and it was actually just touched on page 6, line 2, page 4, line 12, and page 11, line 4. Our ask would be whether does the bill place all of this burden on the subdivider to mitigate risk because the conveyance passes through the subdivision? In other words, if there's an open ditch, it's not clear to me that it's required of the subdivider to mitigate that risk. An example that I would give to you might be in a situation where an open ditch passed through the subdivision, either the subdivider would be required to either fence that or to place a pipeline in place, for example. And that would be our one question here. To me, it's not entirely clear that the subdivider has to mitigate that risk that they create by virtue of the subdivision.
We might ask the state engineer about that. Why don't we do it right now? And so we don't forget anything.
Mr. Chairman, I'll attempt it, but then I'll let Dave offer anything too. But I think what that scenario describes is more of a civil issue and not a water right issue. And I don't know that the bill is trying to address that or not, but the ditch, the conveyance through a property, we're dealing with water rights. How that happens is a defined conveyance, but if they try to cover up that ditch, that we still have a water right for it. But the conveyance is not our purview, not the state engineer's purview. That would be more of a civil issue.
Possibly would have to be ironed out in the plan
Dave, do you-
somewhere else.
Is that
Okay,
I have nothing to add. That was well spoken.
okay.
And Mr. Chairman, looking at the same right copy. My concern is, and you'll see the language in there that they made a good faith effort to reduce or mitigate risk. And that was the basis of my question, which certainly to the whoever operates the conveyance, whether it's an irrigation district or as named in the bill, if I were on that board, that would certainly be one of my comments back to the subdivider is when we develop this plan, I would like to mitigate all of my risk. For example, one small ditch company board that I serve on, when a subdivision went in adjacent to it, our liability insurance increased by about 300%. And the subdivider wasn't required to mitigate that in any fashion.
Okay. I guess.
But
I'd
do
ask-
not
I-
hold up
I-
this bill for that
I
question.
know.
Please.
The question I'd ask state engineers, that's out of your purview. That has to be addressed by the planning commission or the county or whoever's doing, okay.
And that was the other reason I asked that, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
because I am on a county planning commission. So,
Okay. Okay,
but thank you very much.
thank you.
I'd welcome any other questions, I think.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director of Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I want to commend you and commend the Select Water Committee for taking up this issue. This is an important, I don't need to impress upon you how important this issue is. We're dealing with a finite resource and which seems to be becoming more finite as has been discussed here. So we appreciate the effort to capture those rights before they're orphaned. I do appreciate and will mention that we've had the opportunity, the Select Water Committee did include us in their conversation and allow for our comments, and we appreciate them doing that and paying attention to what our comments were. So appreciate that. I just today have just one, I guess, clarifying question to make sure my assumptions are correct. And that is, it's not an uncommon practice for city planning and zoning codes to recognize that once the subdivision is completed, that the city will then be serving the subdivision with water. And in recognition of that, some of the codes indicate that as a condition of approval, the developer will be required to transfer water rights to the city, essentially option B of the four options here. And I guess I just want to clarify, because I don't believe there's anything in here that restricts the city when they approve a subdivision from making the requirement that the developer take option B. I guess that's a question, maybe
No,
not.
I
for you.
think so. I think I could answer it. There are other options here. This is a really good option to transfer it to the city. If I understood the bringer of the amendment or the bringer of the bill, we would have other options that would be on the table. It wouldn't necessarily be transferred to the city or town. It sometimes can't be unless it's a water right on that particular.
Well, that's what I'm referring to, is the existing water rights on the land that's going to
Okay.
become the subdivision. It's not an uncommon practice in city planning to say, well, we're going to need additional water rights when we have this new subdivision. So easiest way to get the additional water rights is from the person that's asking us to do the subdivision. So that's kind of usually a first step. I recognize in here that they're given that all four options exist.
And my question, which may be a question for legal, would be, I don't believe, and I want to make sure, I don't believe that this would stop a city from saying, well, as a condition of us agreeing to take on service of this new subdivision, we're going to ask you to take option B.
I think you're correct on that. That'll be something that goes through the planning process. Would you be able to add more to that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I could. I would suggest the same thing. It's probably a big legal matter on that. You know, I would suggest that maybe the city would negotiate on maybe helping the process through. I know that is always a big issue, is the cost to get those transferred. You know, but that's something the city's gonna have to deal with, I would
Yeah.
say.
And again, in city planning, it's, we've recognized this, we, the profession, have recognized, the need not to abandon the different thing, not to orphan water rights. And that's why that's kind of a fairly common practice. So again, I'll have, unless I guess I just put on record that it's my understanding that this wouldn't, do anything to preclude us from continuing that practice in the future. And as I have my legal folks look at it, I'd reserve my right for future comment
Yeah.
as this goes through the process.
So if we vote on this and vote the bill through and you find some legal basis to fix something, we can bring amendments to the floor. We do it all the time.
Yeah. And
Okay.
again, Mr. Chairman, I don't see a problem here. I just want to make sure that before we're finished that we, that we're comfortable with that. We do think this is a fantastic bill. Again, applaud the efforts of the Select Water Committee and of the legislature to address this. Thank you. I'd take any questions.
Questions? Thank you, sir. Oh, Bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bill Novotny. I'm not here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. They've actually taken a monitor position on this. I'm here as actually a Johnson County Commissioner looking out for the municipalities within my county. And I fully support this bill and encourage you to move it forward. When you look at the city of Buffalo, they are actually a city that has stranded water rights. And for whatever reason, either their city planner or their public works director has not taken the time to do the legwork to get those rights transferred. Why that's important is because the Clear Creek watershed is over adjudicated. And actually the city of Buffalo does not even have the senior water rights on Clear Creek. When I look at the town of KC, who has a staff of 2, as they experience growth, and there are areas with water rights around the city of KC, they really don't have the sophistication to handle that process. So I like that the process that currently is in place for counties is essentially cut and pasted out of our statute and taken into the municipal section in statutes. And so I would encourage you to move this forward. I think this is going to help prevent a lot of future problems as we deal with water issues across the state of Wyoming. And what I also like is that really there are some options in there. And so as the city of Buffalo or the town of KC is contemplating annexation and water rights are involved, they can use their subdivision agreements and their annexation agreements to handle those unique situations where there is water rights attached to the property that they may be bringing in to their city limits. So with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Okay. Question.
Mr. Chairman, I don't really have a question. I just appreciate him coming forward and stating that they're in agreement that we need to push this forward.
Okay. Thank you. Any other public comment? Do we have anyone online, Carol? Okay. All right, committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Clausen,
Second.
second by Larson. Committee, do you see any changes that you want to make to this bill? Any discussion on it? Question being called for, roll call, please.
Representative Blackburn. Vice Chair Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Fortner.
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Western. Representative Wharf. Representative Winter,
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
9 ayes do pass.
Okay, thank you. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 73. And we have, looks like a whole crew of people that can help us with this. Welcome, folks. Oh. And we have more to read. Thank you. So before we start this, it's been my pleasure most of the time to be able to work with our Water Development Commission on this is a planning bill and there's a construction bill and it's a long process and it's been really interesting to see how the state of Wyoming develops water, and I've appreciated the way this office works. And we have the chairman of the Select Water Committee as well as actually the director of the state engineer, who's also knows a little bit about this because we moved him from there from water development. Jason Mead will be probably the lead on this bill, and let's go ahead. How do you want to do this? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Evan Simpson, representative. Folks, you've seen the omnibus bill every single year, and this is formatted exactly the same. The blue sheet in your binder that's in your cover summarizes the projects. So, Mr. Chairman, we're open to handle this. This is probably a 30-minute discussion if you want us to go through every project. If you're sufficient, we'd like to get you into the session here in 25 minutes. And so, Mr. Chairman, do you want us?
You have less than that because we have to vote, get upstairs.
You do. Do you want us to go through every project, or do you want?
I would rather not. Some overviews and questions the committee has. It's been looked over many, many times. But
Mr. Chairman, I would ask if there's anything in the bill then, in the paper bill, it's inside your binder. Is there anything you have questions about that we could just jump right into specifics?
okay, it doesn't. Yes, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Simpson, I see the cloud seeding for Medicine Bow. Is there also cloud seeding for Wind River? I didn't see that as a line item.
Mr. Chairman, that is in the construction bill. This particular, so this is the planning bill, obviously. And this is a study to, I guess, confirm in the Sierra Nevadas Sierra Madres and the Medicine Bow range where we do aerial cloud seeding. And we've been doing that in an active fashion for the past 4 years to confirm what we originally thought were the numbers on additional stream flow that results from that cloud seeding. So this is more of an assessment of the program. And then the construction bill will have the funding in it for the actual cloud seeding that takes place in the Wind Rivers and then also the Sierra Madres and Medbo range.
So as a follow-up, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more of the research arm of it without the actual cloud seeding portion, which is in the construction.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see on the fiscal note back here that looks like all the money's coming out of one water account going into another one, the water development, going back into the water commission. Is there going to be any new monies coming out of the general fund or from taxpayers to this program that you foresee in the future? Don't look like it on here, but I just asking.
Yeah, there's a process now if you can do it quickly, and I think you can. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, the funding for the water development programs comes through the mineral severance tax distribution, and the funding that so we have 3 accounts. Account 1 is water new development of water. Account 2 is rehabilitation of projects that are 15 years or older. And then account 3 is our dam and reservoir program. And each one of those accounts get a certain percentage of the mineral severance tax that is currently capped at 155 million. And then that's what funds our program each biennium.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So we're basically just talking about money that's already, or minerals that's already been taxed. So this is already coming out of a tax program. So there's nothing, no new taxes. That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And we're just now appropriating those funds to particular projects and planning studies.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'll open it up to public test. Thank you. Open it up to public testimony. No one online. Is there any further discussion or anything on the bill? Bill's been, oh, yes. Bill has been moved, seconded by Western. Moved by Clausen, seconded by Western. Discussion. Question being called. So be a roll call. We're missing one of our people. He didn't, huh? Okay, and I'll keep that open. I'll just keep the roll open for when he gets back, because I kind of know he'll want to be voting on it. Okay, go ahead, Carol.
Representative Blackburn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Fortner.
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Representative Wharf.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye. We'll keep,
So
Keep it
currently we
open.
have 8 ayes,
yeah, and
and it is a due pass.
I don't think he thought we'd get through it that quickly when he took off to get some information, so. We are, meeting's basically adjourned except for one vote. But I'll be sticking around here to clean up some things. Thank you, committee. Thank you, everybody.